The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand.
Well, welcome. It's Tuesday morning, May 1st, and we have today our very special program on Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. We are going to be talking with two of the experts on the national security issues that are facing our nation in areas that I think a lot of people are not really aware of, and that is electromagnetic pulse weapons, and also the fact that many of our port facilities are being transferred to another country, and the other country that is taking over these port facilities is Gulf Painter, which is out of the United Arab Emirates and is part of the family that was part of the Iraqi weapons program, are owners of that organization. So this is going to be quite an interesting program today. Our first guest, and he's only on for the first half hour, is Dr. Peter Pry. And Dr. Pry is Executive Director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security. He served on the Congressional EMP Commission. He is also the Congressional Security Posture Commission, served there, the House Armed Services Committee, and in the CIA. And he is the author of Blackout Wars. And Dr. Pry is considered one of the preeminent experts on electromagnetic pulse weaponry in the world, but certainly in the United States. And he will be describing what is going on with our country right now and some of the things that happened under the Obama administration. And the first thing that happened under them is Obama dissolved the EMP Commission completely. And now that we have no real expertise in Congress that is keeping track of the electromagnetic pulse weapons that are being developed and have been in existence for a long time. Dr. Pry, welcome to the show. And in the second portion of the show, we'll be bringing on Mary Fanning, who is also a very alert and informed national security expert. So anyway, Dr. Pry, welcome to the show, and I'd love to have you tell our listeners what you have discovered. I read your article on Sunday in the Washington Times, and I think you might want to share that with our listeners.
Yes, we might want to actually switch subjects and talk more about recent revelations by Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu about Iranian cheating on the Iran nuclear deal, the so-called Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. That, too, is relevant to EMP, and it's something the EMP Commission has been warning about for many years that Iran was not only cheating on that deal, but many of us believe that Iran probably already has nuclear weapons. But to go back and correct one fact in the introduction, sad to say, it is the termination of the EMP Commission, which happened in September 30th, all right? Ironically, in the same month that North Korea successfully tested a hydrogen bomb, which they described as designed for a super EMP attack. And 2 days after they tested that bomb, they released a technical report entitled EMP Might of Nuclear Weapons, which accurately describes super EMP weapons. The Commission had been warning that North Korea probably could make super EMP weapons, because they had received information many years ago from the Russians. The Russians transferred the design for a super EMP weapon to North Korea. And in that very month, when you would think that it would be urgent to redouble the efforts of the EMP Commission to protect the country, September 30th is when the EMP Commission was terminated. Now, this was due to efforts by Obama holdovers still in the Department of Defense. But it was also done in cooperation with congressional staff. It was a congressional staffer hostile to the EMP Commission working for a Republican, who was Max Thornberry, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. The commission was basically falsely accused of corruption, and Thornberry started an investigation of the commission, all right, and basically shut it down on September 30th. Never gave the commission, never met with the commissioners, never gave us a chance to defend ourselves. In fact, they completely ignored. We had asked Thornberry and the House Armed Services Committee to do an IG investigation of the Obama holdovers in the Department of Defense, who had been stonewalling us, holding back resources from the commission so we couldn't do our work. They were doing everything they could to sabotage us because they thought Hillary was going to be elected, you see. And then when she wasn't, they still continued their sabotage efforts. But for some reason, they advised us, oh no, we don't think you should launch an investigation. But I'm not sure that this petty inside baseball, sad to say that, the commission is gone. Our efforts do continue under my EMP task force. Now, a task force is doesn't have the power and resources that a congressional commission has. It's like we've gone from an aircraft carrier to a torpedo patrol boat. But we're not giving up. I mean, as long as we can launch one torpedo or fire one gun, we're going to keep fighting the EMP war, even if we don't have the support of some of the people in the Congress. We have plenty of support around, and we've got the best experts. I mean, the chairman of my boss, Dr. William Brenham, is really the free world's foremost expert on EMP. He was present at the discovery on the Defense Science Team. When I was in elementary school, he was on the Defense Science Team that discovered the EMP phenomenon during the 1962 Starfish Prime test. And then he went on to become President Reagan's science advisor, White House science advisor, and administrator of NASA. And he is an Albert Einstein quality intellect, as are many of the EMP commissioners. Maybe I should talk a little bit about what is EMP and why I hear about it, particularly in the context of the revelations from Iran. Well, basically, an electromagnetic pulse is the greatest threat facing our civilization. And it was very little known, little understood until the EMP Commission started publishing unclassified reports on this. It had been one of the deep, dark secrets kept in the Pentagon throughout the Cold War. And it wasn't until the EMP Commission reports started getting published in 2008 that it came on the public scene. But still, people, it sounds so fantastic that, still many people don't realize that it's a real threat and it's not science fiction. You can basically cause an EMP by detonating a nuclear weapon above the atmosphere in outer space if you were standing on the ground directly beneath the explosion. which could be 30 to 400 kilometers over your head. You wouldn't even hear it going off, because it's going off in the vacuum of space where there's no noise. The blast wouldn't reach the ground. There'd be no fallout. There'd be no thermal effects to set people afire because it's so far away. The only thing that would be created would be this electromagnetic pulse, which is like a super energetic radio wave. It's got like a radio wave that's got so much energy in it that it would destroy electronics across the vast region. In fact, the region is determined by the height of burst of the weapon. So if you're 30 kilometers high, the weapon can see out for 600 kilometers radius. And in a big circle that has a radius of 600 kilometers radius on the ground and in the air, all the electronics that are not protected would be at risk. So you'd cause just mass destruction of electronics. The pulse itself is harmless to people directly. You know, it'll pass harmlessly through your body like a radio wave. But if you happen to be on an airplane, that airplane is very likely to fall out of the sky and crash. Immediately, there'd be no water, you know, because we need vast amounts of electricity. The electric grid would collapse, and all the things associated with blackout, you know, would happen. And for a protracted period, because the grid, we would not be able to repair it. The damage would be so deep as a consequence of an EMP, because the grid is unprotected. And all electronics that are unprotected would be at risk. And so you would be looking at a protracted blackout that would last months or even years. And we calculated that if you had a nationwide blackout, and you could cover the whole nation with one weapon, if you raise the altitude of that weapon to 300 kilometers, it would put an EMP field over all of North America. You know, blackout Canada, the 48 contiguous United States, and much of Mexico. And if the blackout lasts a year, we estimate we'd probably lose 90% of the population through starvation, disease, and societal collapse. You know, we've got 320 million Americans, and we only have enough food to feed people for 30 days. And that food would start spoiling immediately after the EMP, because there'd be, you know, the big regional food warehouses, the temperature control systems, and freezers, and things like that wouldn't work. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, there'd be no water immediately. In 7 days, the 100 nuclear reactors in this country would probably go Fukushima, as their batteries ran out of electricity to keep their cores cool, to keep fuel rods and cooling pods cool. And there'd be massive explosions everywhere because of natural gas pipelines. The SCADAs, these are supervisory control and data acquisition systems, of the little electronic components that allow natural gas to flow through the pipelines, spark, cause fires, explosions. You probably have firestorms in cities. So it's a real apocalyptic kind of scenario. And yet there's no excuse for us to be vulnerable to this. You know, the EMP Commission back in 2008 provided a plan to protect the country. Now, the Obama administration completely ignored that plan. That's why nothing was done for 8 years. And the commission couldn't even get in, you know, to see the White House. National Security Council staff, they wanted nothing to do with us, didn't want to hear from us. That's because EMP is a politically incorrect threat. It didn't fit in with the foreign policy objectives and domestic policy objectives of the Obama administration. I could get into some of those, but to give you a few examples, the climate change, for example, you know, was the fixation of the Obama administration. You know, they wanted everyone to believe the biggest threat to us, not EMP, but it was global warming. And as part of their policy, cope with global warming would be to reduce our reliance on hydroelectric, nuclear power, coal, because they see all these things as negatively impacting the environment, and to replace them with green renewable energies, you know, like solar and tidal and wind. And that goes in the EMP Commission recommendations go in the opposite direction, you know, because hydropower and nuclear power and coal are the most resilient forms of energy. They are, because of their technologies that they rely upon, They are more resistant and survivable to EMP and cyber attacks and even physical sabotage than other forms of energy. So not only do you want to keep those kinds of energy around, but you might even want to increase them. And also as a practical matter, solar and tidal and wind are so far removed from being able to replace these other forms of energy, that we would really have to fundamentally change the way our society works, because they would not be able to substitute these, provide the amount of electricity the American people need for the kind of economy and the kind of society that we are used to, especially since we are now an electronic civilization that consumes vast amounts of electricity. And other issues, for example, indeed, I'll just mention one other, the Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, was a high priority, some would say the highest priority of the Obama administration, to sell that to Congress and to the American people. So Obama could take credit for denuclearizing Iran and removing the Iranian nuclear threat. But EMP doesn't fit comfortably into that narrative. Obama had to convince people that the very poor verification provisions that were in the JCPOA would be adequate to ensure that Iran would not be able to threaten us with nuclear weapons. The argument being that even if they were cheating, they would have to develop many nuclear weapons, perhaps hundreds of them, and work on missiles for many years in order to rival the U.S. nuclear deterrent, and that was just not a practical concern, that even the poor verification provisions that we had in Iran through the International Atomic Energy Agency would be adequate to protect us from breakout by Iran becoming a real serious nuclear threat to the United States. But if you mention EMP, all you need is one nuclear weapon, and it doesn't even have to be a high-tech, sophisticated weapon. Any kind of a nuke would do, and all you have to do is get it above 30 kilometers. You do that with a balloon. You don't even need a missile to do that, or you use a jet doing a zoom climb or launch it off a freighter using a short-range ballistic missile. Those are capabilities well within Iran, and Iran is on the verge of developing much more sophisticated missiles, ICBM, satellites, making EMP attack. But EMP didn't fit into the narrative for the Iran nuclear deal. And now, of course, we know from yesterday that, the EMP Commission was right all along about Iran cheating on the nuclear deal. And that, in fact, some of the interesting things that we were talking about were put right on television by Prime Minister Netanyahu back in 2003. According to the Prime Minister's presentation, the Iranians had as an initial goal developed 5 deliverable atomic warheads that they could deliver by missile. And he also showed a picture of the Shahab-3, Iranian Shahab-3 medium-range missile. It showed a plan put a warhead inside of that reentry vehicle for the Shahab-3. Now, what's interesting about that is the reentry vehicle that was on television the other day is the normal reentry vehicle, the high explosive that normally has high explosives in it, not a nuclear weapon. And we know from the IAEA investigations, and the Israeli obviously confirmed it on television yesterday, that what the Iranians were doing was they had come up with, they experimented with 14 different designs for the nuclear weapon, figure out a way to fit an atomic warhead into the reentry vehicle for the high explosives warhead. In other words, you take the high explosives out, put an atomic weapon in. Now, why would you do that? Why would you go through all that trouble to do that? Well, it's obviously to keep it secret, to hide an atomic bomb inside of the normal high explosives warhead, fool everybody, so that you would have these nuclear-armed Shahab-3s mixed in with your normal force. Because obviously it's a lot easier to change the shape of a reentry vehicle, than it is change the shape of an atomic bomb. Okay? But the Iranians didn't want to do that. They wanted to deceive us into thinking that, they don't have any nuclear weapons. they're obeying the Iran nuclear deal, when in fact they were clandestinely deploying a missile force. I think I will go beyond what Prime Minister Netanyahu was warning us about yesterday. You know, we should, if we are prudent, we ought to assume that the Iranians deployed at least 5 nuclear-armed Ahab-3 missiles, maybe other longer-range kind of missiles, but at least 5, because that was the goal back in 2003. And another thing that was very significant, I thought, that in the briefing yesterday, is that the Prime Minister showed on television actual photographs where they had cast uranium hemispheres, okay? So the Iranians had moved beyond paper planning for the bomb, and they were actually casting uranium hemispheres, you know, which is what you need for an implosion device. And we know that they tested an implosion device at one of their military bases. So they basically were past, by 2003, which was 15 years ago, all right? They were past the paper bomb, and they were actually casting uranium metal. You know, I think you have to be Pollyanna to think that they stopped there and decided, we're going to wait for President Obama to come along and then sign this nuclear deal with him and not actually build the weapons. In other words, they were on the technological one baby step away. All they had to do was put those hemispheres together, surround them with high explosives, follow the blueprints that they had, and they would have the bomb back in 2003, which is what we think they did. And I think it's obvious from the evidence that was on television, even though the Prime Minister didn't go that far, I'm willing to go that far, as were many of the EMP commissioners. For years, you know, we've been warning that Iran probably already had the bomb, and the Iran nuclear deal, you know, was a farce to begin with because they were already a nuclear weapons state. And that's what we should be assuming, just the same way the North Koreans cheated on the agreed framework with Bill Clinton. We've forgotten that. You know, Clinton was telling us for years that his agreed framework had saved the world from a nuclear North Korea, and it was all a lie. They had cheated on that agreed framework, and look where we are now with the North Koreans.
Right. Well, as a matter of fact, even with the North Koreans, we helped fund that nuclear program because of Clinton's moves. He actually gave them money to move that program. Dr. Pry, one thing I want you to tell our listeners is how inexpensively we could harden our infrastructure against EMP attack. I mean, I've heard very small numbers. It would be very easy to do, and yet, in spite of that, Congress and leadership has not done any kind of a full-scale hardening.
That's right. We estimated back in 2008, you know, it would cost about $2 billion for our plan to harden the electric grid. That might be $3 billion today. So for $2 to $3 billion, which is what we were under the Obama administration. Thank goodness President Trump stopped this practice. But under the Obama administration, we were giving $2 billion a year to Pakistan. Every year, $2 billion in foreign aid. Okay? And they're our enemies, really. I mean, they're a nuclear weapons state. They hid Osama bin Laden from us. You know, they've helped the Taliban, who have killed American soldiers. We were giving them $2 billion a year. You know, if we took the foreign aid money that we saved, President Trump has defunded that and he stopped giving money away to Pakistanis. But if we spent that for 1 year on the security of the American people, you know, we can harden the electric grid and safeguard 90% of the population's lives from this EMP catastrophe that I'm talking about. That can be caused not only by a nuclear weapon, by the way, but it can also be caused by the sun. I mean, and that, right? There's no deterring the sun. You know, we will encounter a geomagnetic superstorm like the 1859 Carrington event again sometime, probably soon. NASA estimates 12% per decade because we're overdue for another Carrington event. You know, the event I'm talking about is, you know, the sun throws off these coronal mass ejections, popularly called solar flares sometimes. And these things travel basically a chunk of the sun that is fired out of the sunspots. They travel at 1 million miles an hour or faster, and they're coming out of the sun all the time. So we're basically in a Russian roulette game with the sun. And every now and then, these things hit us. Now, in fact, they hit us, the smaller coronal mass ejections hit us every year. And every year we get geomagnetic storms. They're not super storms, but they're enough to cause problems with air control. Sometimes they cause problems with the electric grids. They usually only affect countries at high northern latitudes like Finland and Sweden. But then every now and then we get a bigger one that comes further south. Like in 1989, there was the hydroquebec storm that blacked out half of Canada in 90 seconds. And affected part of the northern part of the country. We actually lost an extra high voltage transformer in New Jersey. That transformer was designed to carry 750,000 volts. 750,000 volts, and it was melted in 90 seconds. And this wasn't a geomagnetic superstorm. It was more powerful than usual. It was like 1% the power of a Carrington event, okay? But it's a foreshadowing, sort of a forewarning of what the sun is throwing at us someday. We missed a Carrington class coronal mass ejection. I think it was 2012 or 2013. It crossed the path of the Earth and missed us by just 3 days. Now, 12% per decade, that's the best NASA estimate right now. That virtually guarantees that within our lifetimes, that are our grandchildren, that we have at most 3 generations, before we're going to get hit again by this event. And it will cause an EMP that is worldwide, collapse electric grids everywhere in the world, and put billions of lives at risk. And yet, there's no excuse to be vulnerable to that. The Department of Defense has been hardening military systems 60 years. We do know how to do it with surge arresters, block devices. In fact, everybody on this who's listening, everybody who's got a personal computer, if you look at the plug on your personal computer, the plug is kind of fat. It's bigger than a normal plug. But that's because there's a little surge arrestor in there. It's designed to protect your personal computer from a lightning strike on the power line. That surge arrestor will protect it. It'll switch off and temporarily interrupt the electrical flow, not long enough to interfere with your work, but long enough to interfere with that so that the lightning doesn't get in and burn out your personal computer. Right. Lightning is what we call E2 EMP. The lightning that would be the E2 EMP created by a nuclear weapon is worse than normal lightning because it doesn't just straight a point, but it covers an area. All of North America would be covered in effect by something like lightning. But you don't have to worry about that because most things are already protected against lightning. Now, the other kinds of EMP that are generated by nuclear weapons, by the sun, are stronger. They have different characteristics, but they're more threatening than lightning. Call them super lightning, okay? But we have already proven that as a society, we have been able to take steps to protect ourselves against E2 EMP, and we don't even think about it. We just go about our daily lives. It can be the same thing with these other forms of EMP. We just need to have surge arresters and blocking devices that are more robust, more powerful, and it only adds 1% to the cost of manufacturing things. People protect their cars. It would cost the material cost of protecting a car from EMP is like $100. The material cost is probably actually less than $100. The most expensive thing would be the labor to install ferrite tubes on the wires in your car compartment to mitigate EMP effects. So ultimately, the EMP Commission is a good news story because we can protect ourselves against this existential threat. The bad news story is that we haven't done it. Obama didn't do it for 8 years. Now, President Trump deserves an A+ because he's the first president in his new national security strategy. He's the first president to include EMP and protecting the electric grid and the other life-sustaining critical infrastructures from EMP. So the commander-in-chief is on board with us and has basically directed the U.S. government through his national security strategy to protect us. All right? Senator Ron Johnson is another hero. he passed a bill called the Critical Infrastructure Protection Act that directs the Department of Homeland Security to start preparing and planning and working with the utilities to protect the country from EMP. Now, if we were still a constitutional republic, all right, the kind of country that we were, that I grew up in, this should have solved the problem. Because when you have the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security Committee ordering the Department of Homeland Security to do something through a law, and you have the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, telling his government, this is my national security strategy. I want this done. The response of the government is supposed to be to salute, say yes, sir, and to get it done. And in the past, that would have happened. But that's not what's happening. I mean, one of the sad things I have to report to you and your audience, having the commission lasted through the Obama administration into the Trump administration, is that while we have a President Trump, we still have, basically, our government is basically still the Obama administration. And I have seen these guys. I mean, we confronted them. And they will use all kinds of excuses. They're actually working against the president's policies. They don't want to protect the grid. They want to do what they wanted to do under the Obama administration and continue those same policies. And they're willing to come up with all kinds of excuses, including me.
You really understand sometimes what a terrible burden it is to know some of the things that I know. And try to wake people up and impart this knowledge to them. And find out that they just have walls built in front of them. They want to be slaves.
Now, I risk sounding like a conspiracy theorist, but it's no longer a theory. What I'm about to say is fact. The secret organizations of the world power elite are no longer secret. They have planned and are now leading us into a one-world communist government.
Welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, and I have a special guest on the call today, and that is Dr. Peter Pry. Dr. Pry, I know you're a busy man and you've got other interviews yet today, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about how important it is to bring the EMP Commission back and how we can help in that process, and why it's important to bring back not only the EMP Commission, but the original commissioners who have a lot of knowledge and a lot of background on this stuff. And we're always concerned that whenever you create a new commission, there is a loss of, let's say, expertise when a new commission is put together. And you've been in business a long time, and why it's important to bring that commission back.
Yes, the original EMP Commission, chaired by Dr. Graham, was in operation for 17 years. And on and off. And I would add the commissioners they would do it for free. They work pro bono and have worked pro bono for 17 years. And these are historic figures, some intellectual giants on national security and intelligence. It includes people like mentioned Dr. Graham, but another one of the commissioners is Dr. John Foster. He's one of the last people who actually worked in the Manhattan Project. And he is our foremost nuclear weapons expert. He's designed all the nuclear weapons that are in current inventory. Another one of the commissioners is Dr. Lowell Wood. Some people consider him, he is the most inventive man in America. A man who was a bona fide genius. He was the scientists at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory would look to him as the scientist on all kinds of things. And he actually holds more patents than any American in history on inventions. He has more patents than Thomas Edison. And those are just a few of the examples. Jim Wolfe, who was the former director of the CIA, you cannot easily replace. In fact, they are irreplaceable. Dr. Graham, as I said, here's the guy who discovered EMP. And the Congress's plan, cancel this commission, shut this commission down, and then replace it with people, half of them to be appointed, half the new commissioners will be appointed by Democrats, all right? And the other half will be selected by the snot-nosed congressional staffer who shut down the EMP Commission. I mean, that's one of the most appalling things about this. You know, it wasn't like the Congress shut down the EMP Commission. It was done by one member of Congress who didn't even investigate the facts. He just did what his staffer told him to do. You know, these staffers have incredible, ridiculous amounts of power that they could do something like this. This is like telling Albert Einstein, I don't want you working on the theory of relativity anymore. I'm going to choose somebody else to replace you to work on the theory of relativity. I mean, how's that going to work out, right? You know, that's basically, except now we've got, you know, 320 million American lives dependent on getting the answer right. I can guarantee you this new thing, the new commission they're bringing on is just a CYA. It's a state commitment, so that they can protect themselves from political damage. To say, oh, we care about EMP. You know, see, we're bringing back this other commission. Now, we still have the EMP task force. And, you know, it's a nonprofit. And, you know, that can be supported. We're going to continue our struggle there. The best thing would be to reestablish the commission and to, you know, write your members of Congress, the Senate, the President. I'm not sure it's possible, though, because of the, you know, Congress, individual members of Congress who have a lot of power, like, you know, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, they may not be swayable. You know, look, President Trump doesn't get a lot of what he wants out of these members of Congress. They're able to stall. We didn't get the wall, for example, all right? And the Trump White House, much to its credit, tried to intervene. They actually tried to save the EMP Commission. Can you imagine that? You know, that had the National Security Council calling up some staffer in the Congress and saying, what are you doing shutting the EMP Commission down? Don't do that. But they went ahead and did it anyway. So I'm not sure it's possible to reason or pressure those people into bringing the commission back for whatever corrupt reasons and designs that they may have. But what is possible, and probably more practical, is to let President Trump and your members of Congress and the Senate know that you want the recommendations made by the EMP Commission implemented. Implement those recommendations. Protect the electric grid. You know, protect our other life-sustaining critical infrastructures. You know, whether or not you bring the commission back, do what the commission has been telling you to do, and do it fast. You know, before we get nuked by the Iranians. So that's step one. Step two is don't wait for Washington. Even with President Trump, you know, we can see how frustrated and how often he's stonewalled in many of his objectives, like building the wall, for example, you know, because he's got to deal with a corrupt, incompetent Washington, D.C. It reminds me of the late Roman Empire, and Washington just doesn't do things well anymore, even when you do have a very effective president at the helm. You can protect yourself at the state level. You know, the governor of a state or your state legislature could pass a bill to protect the electric grid in your state. And if you did the right thing in your state electric grid, install blocking devices, surge arresters, and the like, you know, you can keep the lights on in your state, even if you're part of a larger regional grid and the lights go down in other states all around you. And that would ensure, you know, the survival of the people in your state at least. And this has been attempted. It's been done successfully in Virginia. It's been attempted and has had some partial success, at least in the state of Maine. You know, Florida has got an EMP and cyber working group. You know, there have been other, there's a heroic Senator Bob Hawley, the state senator in Texas, who's been trying year after year to get the Texas case protected. But my book, Blackout Wars, actually provides it's a manual that would basically turn people into instant EMP experts, and it's got guidelines in there about how you could protect your state grid, including an executive order. All the governor of your state would have to do is sign that executive order, write in the blank, fill in the blank, and put in the name of your state. And he could, using his Homeland Security powers as governor, order the utilities to start protecting themselves. The state legislature could also pass a bill generic bill in there, where if you filled in the name of your state, that generic bill would be a way forward. So work it through your representatives in Congress. Let the president know you support protecting his plan, the direction he wants to go in terms of protecting the grid. Work at the state level, elect your representatives at the state level, and protect yourselves. I mean, be prepared for your own family. You know, I heard during the commercial, you know, you have an advertisement here about people being prepared. People should be prepared. They should have food and water, a medicine kit, and know how to use it. Think about where you live. Where you live is going to be safe in a grid down, a protracted blackout. And it's funny how people think, oh, that's being a survivalist, that's being a prepper. That has sort of fallen into disrepute, and people make fun of that these days. You know, but I'll tell you, my father's generation, yes, everybody was a prepper. Everybody was a survivalist. They had lived through Great Depression, the World War II, and they had seen government fail in war and peace. And that's not a bad thing. You know, this is the values of rugged individualism and self-sufficiency and being proud that you don't have to depend on the government for everything, but that you are the first line of defense for your family. Those are the kinds of values that made this country great and free in the first place. You know, yeah, the great generation that won World War II and survived the Great Depression. My mother, I mean, they didn't know anything about EMP, but they would have been prepared for it. They were prepared for anything. You know, our backyard was mostly a garden. She was constantly canning food. My father taught us to hunt and fish, not just for recreation, but that's how they survived in the Great Depression, you know? And, you know, they were, those values, that kind of personality, those are the last virtues of the pioneering generation. They were sort of the last of the pioneering generation. And to be frank, our constitutional republic, the way it was structured by the founders, it was built for those kinds of people who were proud of that sufficient, all right? I don't know what happened to us, but in one generation, we seem to have lost those values. Now everybody wants to be taken care of by the federal government. And yet,
well, it's Dr. Fry, that's known as socialism and Marxism, and that's exactly what people like the Obama administration wanted. They wanted to get rid of that rough frontier character, that individualism, that taking care of your own wickiup and not depending on the government for everything. And that is one of the reasons they don't like the EMP Commission, because you guys represent everything they dislike, and I'm sorry to say that, but it just seems to be the truth.
Oh, I think you're right, and I think it also this idea of socialism, this idea of relying on the government to do everything, and maybe this is another thing that got us closed down, you know, because in my reports, for example, one of my other books called Electric Armageddon, you know, I demonstrate, you know, that it's basically a lie that you can rely on the government to come to the rescue. I mean, common sense should tell people, look at how the government performed in Katrina, Hurricane Andrew, and Hurricane Sandy. These things are small stuff compared to what an EMP would be. Look at how the government is performing with Puerto Rico. You know, we've got the entire resources, emergency resources of the entire United States focused on Puerto Rico, you know, for 6 months, and they still haven't been able to bring it all the way back, okay?
Right.
You know, what would happen if North America became Puerto Rico? Okay. Do you think the feds are going to be there to rescue you, given their poor performance in these past events? You know, the FEMA, you know, on its website says, oh, be prepared to take care of yourself for 72 hours. For 72 hours. The implication being that the government, the feds are going to be there like the cavalry in 72 hours. What a lie that is. You know, that is being irresponsible. They should be honest with the people. You know, people need to be prepared to take care of themselves for much longer than that, and perhaps permanently if we don't protect the grid at all, because there'll be no coming back from it if they don't do what the EMP Commission has recommended and protect the critical infrastructures. So I guess I just appeal to your audience that be prepared. Be prepared to protect your family, but don't crawl into a turtle shell and forget that, you know, you need to get control of state government and federal government paying these guys taxes. You are their boss. Make them do their jobs so that God willing, we won't have to rely on ourselves. You know, everyone should be prepared for the worst, of course. You know, but let us endeavor to protect our whole society by doing what the EMP Commission has recommended. Common sense thing. We've never been in a better position to implement it because we do have a president who supports this and wants to go with protecting our country. But he can't do it alone. He needs to know the people are with him.
Right, exactly. Well, there's a lot of new wrinkles in all this, and Dr. Pry, would you tell our listeners the best way that they can get your books? Because I think probably from this interview, there's a lot of people would like to read a little bit more about EMP attack and some of the concerns that you've expressed.
Well, the easiest book, you know, is very short. It's called The Long Sunday, and it basically talks about nuclear EMP attack scenarios that could happen tomorrow. The book for being prepared is called Blackout Wars, and it actually is not just written by me, but it has chapters written in it by each of these state senators and state representatives who actually stepped up and tried to pass bills or successfully did pass bills in their states to make progress on protecting their electric grids and making their state safe. And that's the book that has the generic executive order in it and the generic state bill in it. So all you'd have to do is get your governor or get a state representative to get that bill passed or to sign that executive order, and you will have protected an entire state. And I know people think that you can't move the system, that it's impossible to move the system, but that is not true. The further away you get from Washington, and one of the things I did, you know, with permission of Dr. Graham and the EMP Commission, you know, is that we didn't try to solve the problem through Washington. You know, we realized entirely through Washington. We tried to do what we can through Washington. We've got our plan that's out there for the Washington level. But we went to the states, and I found that the further away you get from Washington, the more common sense there is in government. And in Maine, for example, I made common cause with one state representative. Her name is Andrea Boland, and she was a Democrat, okay? But she cared about this issue, and that one feisty woman, you know, managed to get the governor of Maine, even though the Democrats are not in power in Maine, okay, the Republican governor of Maine, to sign off on a bill that did make progress in defending the state of Maine. So just a handful of people, one determined individual can still make a difference. So this country is still great in that respect, that one determined individual can make a difference. Maybe you can be that person. I mean, that is no small legacy to be able to protect an entire state because you tried. And even if you didn't try, even if you fail, at least you tried. That's got to count for something when you stand before the pearly gates.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And your books now are available on Amazon. Is that a good location to find them?
Yeah, Amazon.com is the best place to get those books. So, The Long Sunday, Blackout Wars, Electric Armageddon, and Apocalypse Unknown are my books. On my books on EMP, I've written a lot of other books on other national security issues. If you want to make a difference, if you want to make something happen, the best book for that is Blackout Wars.
Okay, good. Well, Dr. Pry, I absolutely have enjoyed every second of this program. I got Mary Fanning on the other line, and I wanted to introduce the Club K wrinkle to the whole program here. Would you be available to stay on for just a few minutes with the discussion to start that, or do you need to leave?
You know, I absolutely. You've got me all fired up now. You know.
Okay, good.
As long as you would like. And I would add, as we're going to Mary Fanning, you know, the briefing from by the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu yesterday. You know, these Islamic radical terrorist organizations and the entire nation of Iran is basically a terrorist state. They work with each other, and they work with the terrorists, all right? And what she's going to talk about the Club K missile smuggle one of those things into the country. Yesterday, they threat that she's going to discuss all the more urgent to address, because now we know that it's not just a theoretical possibility that Iran got the bomb. They probably got the bomb. They probably have the bomb. When you look at that picture that Netanyahu put up of the Shahab 3 warhead, that something like that could be put on a Club K missile. They obviously have a demonstrated capability. And as I said before, if we're prudent, prudent planners thinking about our security, that briefing, I think, gives us no choice now but to assume that the Iranians, by 2003, probably already had at least 5 ballistic missile nuclear warheads at their disposal, at least for the Shahab 3, disguised as high explosive warheads.
Right. Well, and I know that the drawings and the information that Netanyahu put forward had a tremendous resemblance to the nuclear beach ball that was also Kim Jong-un and the Jafar family, the father of nuclear weapons in Iraq, created something called the nuclear beach ball, and all those have a very similar look to what Netanyahu's drawings indicated yesterday.
Yeah, that's an implosion. That's the implosion device that I was talking about. And I should have mentioned also in my article, I mentioned it yesterday in the Sunday. And by the way, I had no idea that Netanyahu was going to come out and publicly speak and thereby verify everything I had written on Sunday. Okay, but Iran and North Korea are allies, both by interest and by treaty. And there are hundreds of North Korean technicians in Iran helping them with their nuclear and their missile program. And Iranians have been present in every North Korean nuclear test. And some sanctions are working, the sanctions are working. That might not actually be true, because Iran was given hundreds of billions of dollars, basically, by the Obama administration, which they could have used to alleviate the sanctions on North Korea and help the North Koreans. The two sides, they are working together on nuclear missile threats so that they can take out the United States.
Right. And one of the things that you mentioned early on is the $2 billion that we give in foreign aid to Pakistan. Pakistan has been really the godfather of this whole nuclear weapons program in the Middle East and in North Korea. And we continue to give money to the people who want to put us completely under, and that is absolute insanity.
Yeah, and we shouldn't be underestimating the role that China and Russia have played in this either. Absolutely. North Korean and Iranian missiles are built on Chinese and Russian technology. And Pakistan, we know China provided a design for Pakistan's nuclear weapon. And the EMP Commission was told, as I said before, by some of the most senior EMP experts in Russia. They met with us back in 2004 to warn us that the design for Russia's super EMP warhead had accidentally leaked to North Korea, and that we shouldn't be surprised in a few years to see the North Koreans test one of these things. And sure enough, a few years later, in 2006, the North Koreans had their first test, which was of a very low-yield nuclear weapon. And everybody assumed that it was a failure. But we on the EMP Commission were shocked because that yield, the signature was of a super EMP weapon. A super EMP weapon actually has a very low yield, but it's designed to put out gamma rays, not a big explosion. And it should have looked just like what that first North Korean, and the subsequent 3 tests. So China and Russia are also guilty partners, and it's absurd. The Obama administration treated them like they were our strategic partners, including helping us negotiate the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And what a buzz that turned out to be.
Dr. Fry, we're going into a commercial break, but if you'll stay on, Mary Fanning will be on the other side of the break, and let's continue this.
Okay, certainly.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution. Now an enemy from within would enslave us all again and deprive us of our rights.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, and I have today on the program, I have Dr. Peter Pry, and my very good friend Mary Fanning is on the call as well. Before we get into the discussion on the EMPs and on Club K and some of the other issues that we're going to be dealing with, I want to mention to our listeners that we've got a couple of really good radio programs. Debbie Boscalupi's Radioactive Wednesday is coming on tomorrow at the same time as my program. That would be 8 to 10 Pacific time. And on her program, she's got several guests that are going to be talking about several subjects that are really of interest to us. Number one, beating sanctuary cities, and number two, Camp Constitution. And I also want to mention that Jeff Bennett is on with Life, Liberty, and all that jazz following my program today and following Debbie's program tomorrow throughout the week. And Jeff does a terrific program as well. I also want to ask our listeners, please support this network. Please support our effort to raise funds for a satellite uplink. We have an opportunity to get this message literally all over North America through that satellite uplink, and right now we're serving over 1,000 small FM transmitters around North America, but if we could get that satellite uplink in play, we could literally be reaching millions more. So please support that effort. Go to the station and donate funds as you will to try to support our efforts. Okay, with that, I'd like to get back to the discussion. Mary, are you on the call?
I am.
Oh, wonderful to hear your voice. Mary Fanning, I have to say, I've become a huge fan of Mary because she is one of the most knowledgeable people I've ever met and one of the best patriots in this country. And she has done other radio programs with me on a couple of other networks. And I want to introduce her to the Micro Effect because Mary is a writer and a researcher for the Center for Security Policy. She does articles for the American Report. Mary is probably one of the preeminent researchers in this country. And Mary, you've been reporting on Port Canaveral and now Port Wilmington and Club K. And I want you to explain to our listeners what that's all about so that they can kind of get up to speed on that. And then with Dr. Pry, I'd like to really get into the serious security risks that we have because of the way the Obama administration handled negotiations or so-called negotiations over our ports.
Dan, it's nice to be with you and Dr. Pry. It was just a pleasure listening to you. Dr. Pry is one of the true heroes in this country, and we are so lucky that he is still working on our behalf. Right now, what just happened yesterday with the expose from Benjamin Netanyahu showing the nuclear program that Iran has and showing that sphere, that looks, as Dan, as you mentioned, like the nuclear weapon, the beach ball that Dr. Jafar was the inventor of. Now, Dr. Jafar worked with North Korea. He was working with Iran. He was working with the Russians. His entire career, he was working with the Russians. Yevgeny Primakov, the ambassador from Russia to Iraq, also helped to supply nuclear weapons to Iraq. That when they say there were no WMD in Iraq, it is simply not true. What happened yesterday was really the revelation of the nuclear nightmare that everyone has feared, particularly because the Obama administration placed Gulftainer, owned by the Jafars and the Emir of Sharjah, inside the wire at Port Canaveral. That brought a company that is not only owned by Hamid Jafar, whose brother is Dr. Jafar Dia Jafar, the nuclear mastermind, but Hamid Jafar himself was working with Saddam's WMD program. He was funding it. He was investigated by Congress and the Treasury Department for his oil for superweapons program that he and General al-Assad had put together in order to fund the program. It's worth noting that General al-Assadi was the general who gassed the Kurds in Iraq. So this is a man that had no imagine being involved in a thing like that. So Hamid Jafar is not just simply a guy with an unlucky, to have a relative such as Dr. Jafar Dia Jafar. They are business partners and brothers, and they have worked together as Saddam loyalists for many, many years. So the fact that the Obama administration handed them a 35-year lease without the benefit of a national security review, no CFIUS, and to put them inside at Port Canaveral with a cargo container terminal. Now, it's bad enough that they're there, but when we went and looked into their joint ventures and their strategic alliances, of which we found 4, one was with Rostec, which wholly owns Rosoboron Export, which is the exporter of the Club K. So that is a state-owned weapons company that, they downstream a lot of things to try to make it look different, but it's all state-owned. And understand that Russia deals in 2 things, weapons and oil. So the Jeffers are involved in this joint venture, and they're in the joint venture with Rostec, so that puts them as business partners with the exporter of the Club K. The Club K is a cargo container that is known as the Trojan horse. It opens up, it shoots caliber missiles that can be tipped with nuclear, biological, chemical, or just a standard payload. Regardless, that means that they can get weapons inside of our country when that opens up via a satellite. And after, by the way, those what appears to be a standard intermodal cargo container gets on, riverines, trucks, and trains and travels to every hamlet in this country. And when only 0.1% of containers coming into this country per Dr. Joseph King are actually inspected, and when Congress mandated that 100% should be inspected, but the Obama administration lowered it to 2%, then we have a very serious problem. The Jafars were given this port. They had to know who these people were. The company is also, they did not at the time tell that it was owned by the Emir of Sharjah as their partner. We found those contracts and those documents and the World Bank documents proving that it was not just Gulftainer that was taking our port, but it was also that they were in several other joint ventures with the Russians, the same Russians that just threatened us last week. So they're also in a joint venture with InterRoyal UES, which is connected to Rosatom. So here you have the foremost uranium enrichment specialist out of Iraq, who's in these joint ventures with Russia, not only put into Port Canaveral in a cargo container terminal, but just was unanimously voted to hand them over the Port of Wilmington, 16 miles as the crow flies from a nuclear facility, and in a triangle between Washington D.C., Philadelphia, New York. It is beyond. It's so beyond stupid that it has to be with purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes way beyond, Mary. It goes way beyond stupid. And what it really boils down to now, for our listeners, we need to understand that during the Obama administration, he intentionally opened the doors. He was actually college roommates and friends with some of the people that did these negotiations. They were open-ended negotiations with Jafar's and Gulf Tainer, and they literally opened the door to a national security breach that is almost unimaginable, because through these ports, cargo containers that could be the Club K, could be these weaponized container systems, have full access to not only one of our ports at Port Canaveral, but now with this transaction with Port Wilmington, 2 locations, and they're dealing for even more, aren't they?
There are at least 42 more ports that are on the table right now. And, in fact, the Port of Wilmington deal, they actually had the person that was the other bidder was someone that is selling all their Ports America to Yildirim Group, so that the Turkey will buy these 42 ports. The Turks have been working with the UAE and with Russia now. So you have an alliance of people who are not America's friends. And certainly when they handed over, it's important to realize that when they handed over Port Canaveral, it was through a secret deal called Project Pelican. They announced the deal and signed the deal all in one day. And just several short weeks before that, Badr Jafar, one of the family members of Gulf Tainer, had visited the Obama White House. It is terribly important to understand who all the people who are involved in the deal are. The Jafars, their director of strategic planning is Simon Namazi. The Namazi family is long related in drugs and all sorts of things inside of Iran. Simon Namazi had become an American citizen and then went back to Iran to join the military and became a government official. So he worked for the Crescent Group and Crescent Petroleum. He was their director of strategic planning. It was found in court documents that Simon Namazi was sending talking points to his co-founder of NIAC, as his co-founder Trita Parsi, as he was visiting the Obama White House on 33 occasions in the run-up to the Iran deal. So it looks as though the Jafars, working with Simon Namazi, were working on the Iran deal. That's terribly disturbing.
We've got to realize, and this is something that you bring out in your articles and Dr. Price brought out in his, is the fact that we are now literally in a struggle, a life and death struggle between collectivism and individualism, between capitalism and between communism. And the globalists and the people that have represented so much of this Marxist idea of what world government should be are really intent on destroying the United States as a sovereign constitutional republic. And that is exactly what this conversation is about, because we need to expose just exactly how insidious that whole program is. And Mary, you and Dr. Pry, among others, have done a tremendous job in exposing just how deep the rabbit hole goes and how much we really have lost through bad negotiations. But also, I think, at least in the Obama administration, I think it goes beyond bad negotiations. I believe that it's very intentional that we weaken our nation to the point where we can't defend ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. Dan, you're well aware of, and I'm sure Dr. Pry is, General Pachepa and his book, Disinformation. Well, we have not heard from General Pachepa for about 5 years, and he came out with a piece at PJ Media. And it was interesting that he said, he believes that Barack Obama is intel for the Kremlin. That is a stunning statement for someone who who came to our country and worked with our CIA helping them, that he looks at Barack Obama and thinks he's intel for the Kremlin.
Right, and he was a 3-star general, I believe, or was it a 4-star general with the Romanians?
Romanian general that worked for the KGB.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he knew exactly what was going on, and for him to make a statement like that is pretty amazing. I mean, it tells us a lot. Dr. Fry, what I'd like to do, Mary, is I'd like to talk about these Club K containerized weapon systems and get your and Dr. Pry's feedback on just exactly what we're facing.
Let me tell you about one piece. We worked with a translated Russian defense journal, and they told that they are retrofitting the Russians, their entire Navy, with the Club K,
right.
And that their plan is for a Pearl Harbor 2.0 to bring the Club K into this country and to sink our Navy, to put it in the Middle East, to put them in Europe, and to take down the United States. So handing off our ports to people connected to the Club K while the Russian Defense Journal and the Russian military tells that this is their plan is beyond insane.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, you're talking about that Caliber cruise missile program, and apparently the Russians have a new cruise missile that is virtually undetectable.
A new piece that we wrote is Gulf-Tainer, Club K, EMP, and Russia's Pearl Harbor 2.0 asymmetrical war plans. You can find that at ComDigiNews. This is Russia telling us what they plan to do, and when your enemy tells you what they plan to do to you, believe them.
Yes.
Not just handing off our ports. So when they're saying that they're retrofitting not only their entire, that their submarines have the Caliber cruise missile, that their freighters, that their icebreakers, they have 40 icebreakers in the Arctic. We have one.
And they're actually putting these containerized weapon systems on their icebreakers. Am I right on that?
You are absolutely correct. So, and everything is being retrofitted with the Club K in their entire Navy, including their icebreakers.
Well, it's so simple because a 40-foot metal cargo container is the simplest thing in the world to hide in plain sight.
Well, the amount of them that come in this country, and as I said, they're not being inspected, and we don't even notice them with the electronics because they don't turn on until typically they're by satellite, and they have a shelf life of 10 years. So who knows? By the way, under the Obama administration, how much has been brought into this country?
Oh, that's right. That's right. What a scary thought. Dr. Pry, would you like to weigh in on that concern about the weapons program through Club K?
Yes, I would. I'd like to take a 20,000-foot view of the Club K because it has profound implications for the geostrategic challenge facing the United States. The Russians actually have cruise missiles that are more advanced than Club K, and for their own fleet, for their submarines, for their missile cruisers and the like. Although they also utilize the Club K. But what the interesting thing about the Club K is that it's basically a manifestation of the new Cold War that is going on, where the opposing side is a combination of Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and international terrorism. We don't realize it yet. Our elites don't realize it yet. But that's the block that we're facing in this new Cold War. And we've been asleep through to it. I think President Trump realizes it. But the Obama administration certainly did not realize it. And they've been sleepwalking through the new Cold War, just the way the Clinton administration was sleepwalking through the war on terrorism, not aware. Now, why do I say that? How is the Club K related to that? Think about what the Club K is. You know, it's an advanced cruise missile designed to look, you know, like a normal shipping container. Now, the official Russian Navy doesn't need that, except for things like icebreakers, as Mary mentioned, that are not supposed to be military. But what the Club K is primarily designed for is for export to our enemies, especially to third world type enemies like North Korea and Iran, or Venezuela, or anybody that hates the United States. The idea is to transform those countries into giant killers, so that if they've got a freighter, you can take any kind of a junky old trans-steamer and suddenly turn it into a high-tech missile launching platform that would threaten not just aircraft carriers, but if you link that up with a nuclear weapon, you could take a whole nation out of with it, like the United States. Now, the characteristics of the Club K missile, the way it's marketed, it's sold as a multifunctional missile that can attack targets on land and targets at sea. Let me describe how it works as an anti-shipping missile. You know, a missile really designed to take out aircraft carriers. That's what it's advertised as its chief goal. You know, and it has this long cruising range. You know, where it has a turbofan type engines. You know, that will carry it very close at wave top level, just a couple of meters above the surface of the ocean, so that it can fly beneath the radar. Okay. And then during the last leg of its journey, when it's maybe 100 kilometers or more out, its last stage is a solid rocket booster, and it can come in and maneuver, do crazy maneuvers, so that our phalanx guns and any missile systems to defeat the anti-missile systems while maneuvering them, both through maneuvering and coming in at a fantastic speed. It can do something like Mach 3 or Mach 4 at wave top. Well, and that's how it's advertised. And it can be also put on railway cars so that you could, launch this thing and use it against land targets. But one of the things the Commission noticed about it, we were the first ones to draw attention to the Club K, is that it really turns you into a giant killer because it is dual purpose. It's designed to take a nuclear weapon. And if you had a nuclear weapon on that thing, you could launch the missile from hundreds of kilometers offshore, and it would fly in beneath the radar, and then at the last minute, it could fly straight up using that rocket booster and get up way above the atmosphere, probably at least 80 kilometers high. Now, if you had one of these Club Ks just located at Port Canaveral, for example, and launched it from there, it could fly inland or it could just go straight up 80 kilometers, and it would create an EMP field that would cover most or all of the eastern grid. And that would be enough to take us out as a civilization. We can't survive without the eastern grid. The country has three big grids: the eastern grid, the western grid, and the Texas grid. And if they only took out the eastern grid, that would doom us as a civilization, because 75% of our electricity is generated on the eastern grid, and most of our population lives in the eastern grid, and most of our nuclear reactors are also located in the eastern grid, which would go Fukushima. Right. So that's possibility, and we don't even have. So, by bringing them in, you're basically neutralizing any chance of taking these out by interception. We don't have that many aircraft for interceptor purposes anyway. That neutralizes the national missile defense. As Mary says, they're inside the wire. Not that we would have had that good a shot at taking them out in the first place, because most of our missile defenses are located in Alaska and Northern California, looking for a threat coming over the North Pole. We're not looking for a missile being launched within our own territory, which is what could happen. You could put one of these on a train and have it brought out to the middle of the United States and potentially put a field on all three grids. So it's a real mortal threat. But from the big picture perspective, it's like, you remember during World War II, we had a program when America didn't want to actually get involved in a war with Japan or Nazi Germany, and so we had a Lend-Lease program, where we would send weapons to the British and French to help fight the Germans. This is sort of a Russian example. It's far worse than Lend-Lease. I mean, it's a weapon that's specifically designed for our enemies, and they market it and sell it to our enemies. Even I've seen they have a wordless sort of advertisement that has a animated, very accurate animation that describes how the Club K works. And it's funny how the enemy that the Club K is being used against in these advertisements looks like the United States. They look like U.S. forces and U.S. tanks and U.S. planes, and they're marketing it to our enemies. We know the Iranians for sure have bought them. So this is a big picture. This is not even Lend-Lease. I mean, it's a weapon that's being marketed to Russia's allies in this new Cold War against us to beef these guys up, to beef up their allies, so that they can pose a mortal threat to the United States, so that they, if necessary, in a worst-case scenario, they could fight a nuclear war by proxy against us. And we might never know who hit us. I mean, in order for nuclear deterrence to work, you have to know who attacked me. How would we ever know that if we had a missile launched at us from within our own territory? Anyway, that's the big picture perspective on what this manifests. And I'll turn it back over to you and Mary.
The thing that Mary had mentioned is that this is part of a obvious program that the Russians are talking about, being able to take out the entire United States fleet with this sort of a missile program with the Club K. Mary, you've done an awful lot of work on this stuff. Tell our listeners just exactly how this program has already been, let's say, included in a sweep of our internal ports and getting inside our country through Port Canaveral.
Well, there's one piece that goes into depth at the Center for Security Policy, the perfect storm. You can read that there, but it's also important to understand that also their submarines have been weaponized with these caliber missiles. It's of interest to me that our Department of Defense under Ash Carter had actually developed the Club K first. We had put $1 billion into it. It was 95% complete. Ash Carter canceled that, and 10 days later, Russia announced that they had the Club K. There really needs to be an investigation on how that happened.
Yeah. Absolutely. Mary, it sounds like we're hitting a commercial break, but let's pick this up on the other side.
This is The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Hampel, and today I have two very special guests on the radio show. Dr. Peter Pry and Mary Fanning. And before we get into the last half hour of this discussion, I want to remind our listeners to please tune in tomorrow for Radioactive Wednesday with Debbie Boscalupi. She does a terrific job of connecting the dots as well, and she's got two great guests coming on tomorrow to talk about a Constitution class, actually Constitution University, and some other things that are really important to our listeners. I also want to mention that Jeff Bennett has Life, Liberty, and all that jazz, and that is on right after this program. And please support this radio network, support our outreach, because we are intent on having the entire country hear the message of liberty, and we can do it with your help. So please come to the network, go to the Micro Effect Radio Network, and support this program. Thank you. Okay, Mary, you were talking about Club K. I wanted to mention the fact that the Russians just announced, and this is part of your article that you had written, the Russians had just announced a short time ago that they have literally upgraded all of their weapons systems, and they are totally new generation weapon systems when, in fact, the United States, a lot of our weapons are starting to get a little bit long in the tooth. And they've got a whole new program, and they wouldn't have that in place unless there was some intention of taking the United States down. Am I way off base in saying that?
No, unfortunately, that's just what it appears to be. But when we're also looking that, Lockheed and Raytheon created the missile in a box, the net fires. It was to be used by our Army and our Navy, our, combat ships, the LCS. And when all of a sudden we cancel it and 10 days later Russia announces that they have the Club K, I'm suspicious. I don't know about you. But, and as they, come out with their new missiles, the Caliber missiles, and they're retrofitting their entire Navy with, their submarines with Caliber, their everything with the Caliber and the Club K. This is a retrofitting of the entire Russian military. Meanwhile, Barack Obama had how much of our Navy being in dry dock?
All right, decommissioned, yeah.
Well, decommissioned, and then, we see our sailors at Farsi Island. I'm still sort of reeling from that one where Ash Carter called, and had them save our sailors, and, then put them on TV and on their knees with their hands up, and on the very night of the State of the Union. It is just still, that in itself requires an investigation. Why in God's name would we call the Quds Force to come and rescue our Navy, our sailors on riverines?
Right. No, you're exactly right. Well, what can we expect out of first of all, Port Canaveral? You announced that almost, I'm going to say, a year and a half or maybe even 2 years ago on my radio show. And we were talking about it then, and we were talking about what a huge potential national security disaster that would be, because Port Canaveral is located so close to so many major missile and submarine and military bases, and I mean literally the heart of much of our military industrial complex.
It's not only our airspace and sea command, it's also where our E-4B plane comes in, our doomsday plane, should we ever have to conduct a nuclear war, that comes in. But it's part of, this could not have all happened except that the CFIUS process had been corrupted. And at CFIUS, when the Port Canaveral deal went to CFIUS, they simply bypassed it. Why did they bypass it? Well, the person who was the chairman, the staff chairman at CFIUS, was a man named Eamon Nambi Mir. Eamon Mir was a two-time president of MINA, the youth group of ISNA, So he simply bypassed it. He also, when he submitted the Uranium One deal, the paperwork showed, per Breitbart, that they only mentioned Canada. They never mentioned the fact that that there was Russian involvement in the Uranium One deal. This all requires a serious investigation. This man, Eamon Nambi-Mir, is now overseeing his old job, so he's still in place. So anything that gets submitted to CFIUS, these Obama holdovers are all in place. And that has to be dismantled. The American people have to stand up and demand that this stop and understand that CFIUS is being used to redistribute America. And if the American
Mary,
people...
would you explain what CFIUS is? Because I think a lot of our listeners don't really understand
what CFIUS is. The Committee on Foreign Investments in the United States. It was actually rewritten in 2007 because of the Dubai Ports World deal. They did not want a repeat of that debacle. What happened then was Jack Lew and those that claimed that this was okay to put through this Project Pelican operation claimed it because it was a lease, it didn't require the same oversight. And CFIUS, when it was rewritten in 2007, it specifically says that a lease and a sale must be treated exactly the same. So the argument that they present is completely bogus. So they're using CFIUS to, not only redistribute our ports, but go look at what they're doing with inland ports. And so until the American people stand up, until they get involved, until they make their voice heard, this kind of treasonous behavior will continue.
No, absolutely. And that's why it's important for our listeners not only to hear what's going on, but to actually get hold of your congressman, talk to people about this, share this information that's on this radio show and others like it, so that we can maybe start to break the gridlock in the so-called mainstream media.
Well, fortunately, you have Duncan Hunter, who just wrote a letter to President Trump asking him to put this process through in an investigation at CFIUS to stop the Port of Wilmington deal, to call back the Port Canaveral deal. It is, understand too that you have the UAE has purchased almost every port in the UK. A couple of them have gone to China. If you don't own your own ports, you are a bought operation. We cannot
that's
just
exactly right. And you mentioned that a while back that almost every port in the UK is owned by someone other than a British company. Is that correct? It's
mostly the UAE, and in fact, the UAE, however, does not let anyone else get on charge of their ports. So, if they're setting a standard that you may not go into their ports with any sort of ownership or lease, and also the fact that the same company, Gulf Tanner, has also bought into Port Ust-Luga, one of 12 ports that you can move nuclear materials through, which they're talking about turning into a naval base in Russia. Shouldn't we be considering some of their other joint ventures and strategic alliances before we put these people inside the United States? And in fact, when Dr. Jafar was on CENTCOM's blacklist, is a legitimate military target for capture or kill. So, understand, imagine that this man that is a declared enemy of the United States and his family are being brought in at Port Canaveral and now Port Wilmington. And there are 42 more ports on, and they're already crowing that they're taking the Port of Oakland, that they're taking ports in Texas and on the Gulf. It's stunning that people can sit there and crow that they're taking our ports, and that the Port Canaveral deal set precedent so that legally that no one can stop them. Imagine that people come in with that attitude saying that they're taking over our ports.
Oh, absolutely. And well, who would have ever imagined 40 years ago that our biggest single trading partner would be Communist China, too? Who would imagine all the things that have gone on in the last 20 to 40 years that have completely changed the makeup of our whole economy. And now the fact that they're getting away with all this stuff, it's time for America to stand up and realize the jeopardy that these people put us in.
If the lights go out here, they truly will go out everywhere. This is the last bastion of freedom, such as it is today. If this doesn't stop, and Yuri Bezmenov said that the people under 40, and I tend to agree at this point, are pretty much brainwashed. They don't understand what is being taken from them. They don't understand that communism is being implemented. They don't understand that our universities are completely, brainwashing the population. So if people don't figure this out pretty soon, we're going to, and as Dan, my other work on the hammer. This is so totalitarian when you're understanding that there was a secret surveillance system and that people are being blackmailed into doing what they want. The first thing they need to do is expose the hammer. WikiLeaks dropped that information within 30 hours of me publishing that piece and those tapes showing that they were surveilling, that Brennan and Clapper with Obama had an illegal secret surveillance system. James Comey knows about it. Robert Mueller gave the computers to Dennis Montgomery and John Brennan and James Clapper to build that system. They're well aware that system exists.
Yeah. Well, as
General McInerney?
Now that you brought that subject up, kind of tell our listeners a little about it in case they haven't really followed that.
Well, there's an illegal surveillance system. It's known as the hammer. WikiLeaks came out. They show that what it was and that it does exist when they dropped Vault 7. Fortunately, Judge G. Murray Snow in Arizona, I don't know that he understood what he was doing, but he released the information in a case with the audio tapes from Dennis Montgomery. Dennis Montgomery was a contractor who was working for the CIA. He built this system. He built a previous one, and they pretty much ruined his reputation in the New York Times, etc. However, when this was exposed, he received immunity, and his attorney brought him to James Baker, who was just fired at the FBI, and Comey. And so they gave him immunity, and he had to turn over the 600 million documents that one page upon the other reached 30 miles high. So he turned over all this information. They debriefed him in a skiff, a secure room, about the hammer, about this secret surveillance system. He handed over the proof. As I said, he received limited immunity, and so they are well aware of this, and his attorney, Larry Klayman, has all the proof, and Dennis Montgomery has spoken to Devin Nunes with Larry Klayman, and the American people wait to hear what the illegal surveillance that was happening, what they were doing with Donald Trump, and as I said, millions of Americans looking at their banking system, using it to blackmail them, turning that information over to the IRS. Unless we take down this system, if we let this stand, we will be Soviet America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really, this has got all the earmarks of Stalin's KGB, or I guess prior to the KGB, the NKG, and this has got all the earmarks of a totalitarian system that is a surveillance society designed to keep everyone under a very tight control.
Well, it is, and it's even more disturbing than the old days of Stalin, because the new mad philosopher of Russia, Alexander Dugin, who was the teacher to Medvedev and Putin, believes going into the future with their new empire, it will be a conflation of Nazism and communism. Really, that is the New World Order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It is. I believe, no doubt about it. It's technocracy, a combination of communism, and people need to understand that communism and Nazism are actually very similar. They're both on the very far end of the spectrum where government controls every aspect of our lives. The difference between communism and fascism is that under communism, the state owns and controls all aspects of production, and under fascism, the state controls aspects of production, but it's actually privately owned, and that is starting to resemble an awful lot what we have in our country right now.
Well, and privately owned in Russia means all the oligarchs who all used to be in the KGB, but...
Right, exactly. Wow. I mean, it's amazing how all these dots connect, isn't it? Every time we get some new bit of information, it just leads back to the same conclusions that the rabbit hole is so much deeper than any of us ever realized.
Well, we understand the perestroika deception, right? And part of that was Yevgeny Primakov, the ambassador to Iraq. He went in, as they called him, the bear in the desert. He went in and created, as Dr. Pry just referred to, he created the Islamic bloc. And so he put together this, Iran, Iraq, Syria, China. These people were all to work together with us, but to take us apart, death by 1,000 cuts, via terrorism. And so, take down our military, take the funds that it would cost, understand too, Iraq, we lost 5,000 people, 30,000 people lost limbs, and we spent $3 trillion, blood and treasure, and then we hand the man who was running the WMD program that we went in there to stop, we hand him our port?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing.
This is beyond what could possibly go wrong once you hand a nuclear mastermind terrorist who was heard on Saddam tapes as his deputy minister of defense as they were talking about putting a nuclear weapon into Washington, D.C.
Right, exactly. Well, I think our listeners, at least I believe my listeners, are people who understand that radical Islam and communism are bedfellows, and they work very well together.
Well, Dan, as you know, I like to say radical Islam is the sword of communism. And that's how they are using radical Islam to implement global communism.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Pry, I want to give you an opportunity to weigh in on what you think about this political situation we're in right now as well, and maybe let our listeners know what we can do to get your information, your books, and give you a few minutes to describe what you think is so important about this conversation.
Well, again, going to the 20,000-foot view, I think we're in this new Cold War, and the ancient Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu argued that the best way to achieve victory is without war, and that's what's happening. They're winning the new Cold War without war, and the appearance of President Trump is basically our last hope, in my view, to turn things around, because people have forgotten, I think, where we were in the immediate aftermath of the Cold War. The books were being written, like The End of History by Francis Fukuyama, who basically said, the long twilight struggle between totalitarianism and democracy has finally been won by the democracies represented by the United States. And he portrayed, and a lot of people believe this, all of us hoped it was true, that in the aftermath of the Cold War, the future of mankind was going to be going in the direction of democracies, of free economic systems, free political systems. And but look what happened. under Obama, you know, all of that victory, you know, all of the accomplishments, the foundations of that victory, the military foundations, the economic foundations were undermined by the Obama administration. And we stand today with freedom and democracy on retreat everywhere in the world, except for under Obama, okay? And we were fighting for our lives all over the world. And, you know, now President Trump has come along and in 1 year appeared to have achieved miracles. It remains to be seen. I don't believe for a second North Korea is going to give up its nuclear missile, nor do I think that the Iranians, this taking of a last stand by the United States is a dangerous moment, you know, because our adversaries may well decide to pull the trigger rather than, you know, if they feel that this president is somebody that they're not going to be able to cow into submission the way they did with Obama. Their object has been to win without war by making countries like North Korea and Iran so dangerous to us that those factions of American society that exist on both the left and the right that want to turn isolationism, to go into a Fortress America-type posture, and to abandon our security responsibilities around the world, that those factions will win, and that we will withdraw from the world, and that would, and they, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, will fill the vacuum that's left by the withdrawal of American power, as that's happening in the Middle East, for example, as was happening in the Pacific with, China's taken over, basically South China Sea, in flagrant violation of international law, and nobody's doing anything. Nobody can kick them out, okay? I mean, and that all happened under Obama. Now, suddenly, we've got Trump for this first year, and he's a problem. They thought that future America, that the next American, they were hoping for Hillary, who would continue Obama's policies. But Trump is a problem. They think he might fight. He might stand and fight. And so this is a dangerous moment, you know, in terms of will they unleash all these plans, you know, and try to prevail by war, or will they continue the process of nuclear and weapons of mass destruction blackmail and try to continue to win through intimidation? You know, it doesn't help that CNN and the liberal mainstream media are constantly barking against our commander-in-chief and president, because that creates in the minds. I mean, I know I've spent my whole professional life studying how our enemies think in Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, among the terrorists. They see that. We've basically got a cold civil war going on in this country to such a great extent that, in effect, a coup d'etat, a nonviolent coup d'etat was attempted by our own intelligence services and police services against this president. And they see our country as being very divided. We're at a moment of great military weakness because we've allowed our conventional and our nuclear forces to deteriorate. And I'm sure they're wondering, hey, if we do a Pearl Harbor, an EMP Pearl Harbor, you know, will America shatter like glass and fall into factions and fighting against each other, and not come together the way the Great Federation did in World War II? Isn't it hard to imagine the America we're living in now coming together again the way we did in World War II, or even the way we did after 9/11? You know, so much damage has been done to us, deep cultural damage, you know, so that at least a third to a half of the country, you know, doesn't have that kind of patriotism and is actually ready to blame America first for everything. That does not contribute to the security of this country. That's almost an invitation to the bad guys to do their worst. And on that unhappy note, I have to check out this because I've got a teleconference I've got to take. Maybe, well, some good news you can convey. I mean, I would just reiterate, you know, what I said before about what can people do. You know, urge your congressmen and senators and President Trump to go forward with protecting our country against the worst threat we face, which is this nuclear or natural EMP event, by hardening our electric grids. We should be also deploying space-based missile defenses the way Ronald Reagan did. That's something we can do that would quickly, technologically leapfrog past these guys. We still have the technological superiority to do that. We're in a phase of history right now where the aggressor is favored by the technology, the dominant technology of our era, which is nuclear missiles, cyber warfare, and EMP attacks. All this favors the aggressor. But missile defenses could restore the advantage to the defense. And that would be the best revenge we could have. We could peacefully win the new Cold War all over again, the way Reagan did when he was thinking about SDI. And don't count me for Washington. Get your city protected. Move forward with protecting the electric grid in your state, and be prepared to